My name is Arthur Wallace. It is my intention to set down, with as much clarity and factual accuracy as my memory allows, a complete record of the events that transpired during my tenure as a lookout observer at Watchtower 7 in the boreal forests of northern Canada. I am, by trade and temperament, an archivist. My life has been dedicated to the preservation of records, to the belief that a coherent, chronological account is the only true bulwark against the chaos of misinterpretation and the erosion of time. It is this professional discipline that I now turn upon my own experience, not for the sake of posterity, but for the simple, desperate need to impose order on a sequence of events that defy it. My decision to seek out this line of work was born from a period of profound personal dislocation. Following the death of my wife, Eleanor, the world I had meticulously curated, a world of quiet libraries, the scent of aging paper, and the gentle rhythm of our shared life, had become unbearable. Every familiar object was an artifact of a life that was no longer mine. The silence of our home, once a comfort, was now a crushing weight. I found myself craving a different kind of silence, a vast and impersonal quietude that owed nothing to memory. I sought a position defined by what the job description itself called loneliness and often monotonous routines, believing that in such a vacuum, I might find the space to recalibrate my own shattered existence. The Forestry Service offered just that: a 4-month contract, a tower, and a 100-mile radius of wilderness as my sole companion. It was, I thought, a perfect exile. The journey inward was a systematic stripping away of the world. The helicopter, a red dragonfly against a vast blue canvas, was the last bastion of human noise. For the first hour, the landscape below was a patchwork of logging roads and the occasional glint of a distant roof. Then, those two vanished, and the world resolved into a single, unbroken texture. A sea of trees, vast and primordial. It was a green ocean that stretched to every horizon, churning with the slow, inexorable currents of the wind. I watched the compass on the pilot's console, a silent witness to our progress deeper into a place void of everything I had ever known. No roads, no power lines, no people. I have always experienced a certain trepidation before embarking on something new. But this was different. This was a physiological response to a fundamental shift in my reality. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the roar of the rotors. When the pilot finally banked, pointing toward a small, oval-shaped clearing in the endless forest, the feeling was not of arrival, but of finality. The tower was a skeletal finger of steel pointing at the sky, attended by a small, one-room cabin and an outhouse. It looked less like a human habitation and more like a scientific instrument left on an alien world. We landed in a flurry of clipped grass and dust. The pilot helped me unload my gear: 2 duffel bags of clothes, a box of books and non-perishables, my journal, with an efficiency that bordered on haste. He offered a firm handshake, his eyes avoiding mine. "Dispatch will be in touch for your morning check in," he said, his voice already seeming thin in the immense space. "Good luck." Then he was gone. The red helicopter lifted, tilted, and became a receding dot against the tree line before being swallowed whole by the distance. And then, silence. It was not the gentle quiet of a library or the peaceful hush of a sleeping house. It was a physical presence, a pressure on the eardrums that was more profound than any sound. In that moment, the intellectual concept of my isolation became a visceral, terrifying reality. There was no one to save me. There was no one to hear me scream. It was just me and the immense, breathing forest. Taking a deep breath, I forced the archivist in me to take over. Focus on your immediate surroundings. What do you see? What do you need to do? The cabin was Spartan but clean. A simple cot, a small wood stove, a propane-powered refrigerator, and a desk with a large, laminated map of the surrounding area bolted to its surface. My first task was to check the water supply. The rain barrels at the corner of the cabin were, as I had been warned they might be, bone dry. The next supply drop was a month away. The weight of that reality settled in. Every drop was precious. It was as I was closing the cabin door, preparing to unpack, that I saw it. Taped to the wood, precisely at eye level, was a single sheet of yellowed, typewritten paper sealed in a thick plastic laminate. The title was stark: Watchtower 7, Standing Orders and Observations. I unpinned it and carried it to the desk, my curiosity piqued. I assumed it would be a list of technical reminders or local quirks left by a thoughtful predecessor. I smoothed it out on the desk. The first rules were exactly what I expected. Rule 1: conserve water. The barrels are your lifeblood. Next supply drop is in 30 days. This was sensible, practical advice for off-grid living. Rule 2: perform a full 360-degree scan every 15 minutes. Most smokes are caught in the peripherals. This was standard operating procedure for a lookout, a matter of professional diligence. Then the list began to take a strange turn. Rule 30: at night, you may hear tapping on the cupola glass in sets of 3. It is only the wind on the steel frame. Do not look up from your book. I rationalized it easily enough. Old towers in exposed locations were bound to be noisy. The wind could do strange things. Rule 40: the radio is for fire and weather reports only. Do not discuss unusual sightings. It agitates the others. A necessary rule to maintain radio discipline, I thought. Unusual sightings likely referred to the odd hiker or strange animal behavior, things that didn't warrant official chatter. The others surely meant the other lookouts. Rule 5: if you see a fire that puts itself out, you did not see a fire. Do not report it. Mark it in your personal log as a spook. I knew the term. Spook was used for columns of mist that could be mistaken for smoke, so this seemed like a simple reminder to avoid false alarms. But the last rule on the page stopped me cold. Rule 6: some days, a man will be visible at the base of the tower. His back will always be to you. Do not call out to him. He is not lost, and he does not require your help. This was the first instruction that truly snagged on my sense of logic. My mind raced through possibilities: a local hermit, a poacher, perhaps an eccentric hiker who frequented the area. The instruction was firm, but not overtly supernatural. It was a warning to mind one's own business. Still, it was deeply strange. I read the list 3 times. The final rule, number 6, stuck with me. It felt like a piece of a puzzle that didn't fit. I folded the paper and tucked it into my journal, a primary source document for what was becoming an increasingly strange archival project. I told myself it was simply the lore of a lonely place, the kind of tall tales that breed in isolation. I was a man of facts and evidence, and I would not be swayed by the imaginative scribblings of a predecessor who likely succumbed to cabin fever. That first night, I climbed the 100-foot ladder to the cupola, my office in the sky. The sun bled across the horizon, painting the clouds in hues of orange and violet. The beauty was so profound it was almost violent. I settled into the chair, a book open on my lap, the lantern casting a warm, golden circle in the encroaching dark. The silence returned, deeper now. A velvet blanket, studded with the impossibly bright stars of the north. Hours passed. The forest below was a black, breathing thing. I was lost in my book, the words of familiar comfort, when I heard it. Tap. Tap. It was faint but unmistakable. A sharp, distinct rapping sound on the glass of the cupola, somewhere above my head. My blood ran cold. Every nerve ending screamed at me to look up, to peer into the darkness outside the window. The primal, animal part of my brain was convinced something was out there, watching me. But the archivist, the rational man, held fast. Rule 23 echoed in my mind. It is only the wind on the steel frame. Do not look up from your book. It was a test. Not a test from some supernatural entity, I told myself, but a test of my own discipline. A test of my ability to resist the paranoia that this profound isolation was designed to breed. I forced my eyes back to the page, my heart a frantic bird in my chest. I read the same sentence over and over, the words meaningless. I did not look up. I focused on the sound of my own breathing, anchoring myself to the physical reality of my own body. After what felt like an eternity, the tapping stopped. The silence that rushed back in was heavier than before, charged with a new and terrible significance. I sat there for a long time, the book forgotten in my lap, straining my ears. But there was nothing. I did not know it then, but I had just had my first encounter with the true nature of Watchtower 7. I had followed the rule. And in the cold, clear logic of that place, I had passed some unspoken, unwritten test. The seed of a terrifying new understanding had been planted, and in the silence of the Canadian wilderness, it had already begun to grow. The days that followed my first night were a study in forced discipline. I fell into the rhythm the job demanded: wake before dawn, ascend the tower, and begin the scans. Every 15 minutes, the world turned under my gaze, a slow, deliberate rotation. I logged weather data, the rustle of my pencil on the page a small, defiant sound against the immense quiet. I spoke into the radio at the designated times, my voice clipped and professional, reporting wind speed and visibility, giving no hint of the frantic pulse I had felt during the tapping. I was an archivist, and this was my new collection. The subtle shifts in the haze on the horizon, the patterns of cloud formations, the precise green of the endless trees. I told myself the tapping had been a product of an stimulated mind, a psychological symptom of acute isolation. My new reality was one of facts and measurements, and I clung to it like a man overboard clings to a piece of driftwood. My only connection to the outside world was the radio, a black box that crackled with the disembodied voices of other lookouts and the calm, steady presence of the dispatcher, Kurt. The chatter was my lifeline, a reminder that other people like me were out there, perched in their own steel nests, watching the same vast wilderness. We were a fraternity of solitude. One morning, I heard a lookout from a station far to the east. A man named Roy, his voice tinny with distance, report his morning weather, with a tremor of something I couldn't quite place. After his official report, he hesitated. "Kurt, you ever get the feeling you're being watched out here?" The radio was silent for a beat too long. Then Kurt's voice came back, flat and devoid of emotion. "Station 525, stick to the script. Fire and weather only, right?" "Yeah, sorry," Roy mumbled, and the channel went silent. The exchange sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. Rule Fight 4. Do not discuss unusual sightings. It agitates the others. I had dismissed it as a measure for maintaining radio discipline. But Kurt's tone wasn't just professional. It was a door slamming shut. It was the sound of a topic being deliberately and forcefully buried. I felt a sudden, suffocating sense of my own isolation. The fraternity I had imagined felt more like a scattered group of inmates, each confined to their own cell, forbidden from speaking about the true nature of their prison. It was 2 days later, on a day of searing heat and a sky the color of bleached bone, that I saw it. To the southwest, a plume of white smoke, unmistakable and urgent, rose from the canopy. My training took over instantly. I spun the Osborne Fire Thunder, aligning the crosshairs on the base of the smoke column. My hands, which had been so steady logging weather data, now trembled as I reached for the radio handset. I was about to key the microphone, the official words forming on my lips, when something impossible happened. The smoke stopped. It didn't dissipate or drift away on the wind. It vanished, as if a film had been abruptly cut. One moment it was there, a thick, billowing column. The next, nothing but clear, blue sky. I stared, my mouth agape, my mind refusing to process what my eyes had just seen. I scanned the horizon, thinking it must have been a trick of the light, a heat shimmer. But I knew what I had seen. It was smoke. It was a fire. And it had put itself out. My gaze fell upon the yellowed, laminated sheet of rules I had pinned to the wall beside the map. Rule .5e, if you see a fire that puts itself out, you did not see a fire. Do not report it. Mark it in your personal log as a spook. A spook. The official term was for mist or fog that resembled smoke, a common phenomenon. But this was no spook. This was a fire that had defied the laws of physics. My mind, the archivist's mind, rebelled. A fire requires fuel, oxygen, and heat. To be extinguished, one of those elements must be removed. It cannot simply cease to exist. Yet, the rule was explicit. You did not see a fire. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order to override my own perception of reality. With a hand that felt disconnected from my body, I picked up my journal. I did not radio Kurt. I did not call in a phantom smoke. I wrote the date, the time, the bearing, and a single, damning word. Spook. The ink on the page felt like a betrayal of my own sanity. It was the first piece of falsified data I had ever recorded in my life, and the act left me feeling hollowed out, as if some fundamental part of my professional and personal identity had been scooped away. The true turning point, the moment the last vestiges of my rationalizations were stripped away, came the following afternoon. The day was still and hot, the air thick and heavy. I was conducting my 3:15 p.m. scan, the cupola a sweltering glass box. As my binoculars swept past the base of my own tower, I froze. There was a man standing there. He was in the clearing, perhaps 50 yards from the concrete footings of the tower, near the edge of the tree line. He was dressed in practical clothes, dark trousers and a flannel shirt, even in the heat. His back was to me. He was perfectly still, his posture relaxed, as if he were simply admiring the view into the forest. My first thought was that he was a hiker, dangerously lost. We were 100 miles from any marked trail. My duty was to report him, to call in a potential search and rescue case. I reached for the radio, my mind already formulating the report. But then my eyes fell again on the list. Rule Phase 6A, some days. A man will be visible at the base of the tower. His back will always be to you. Do not call out to him. He is not lost. And he does not require your help. My hand recoiled from the radio as if it were red hot. Every instinct I possessed as a decent human being screamed at me to call out, to offer water, to ask if he was all right. He could be dehydrated, disoriented. But the rule was absolute. He is not lost. I watched him through the binoculars, my heart hammering against my ribs. The detail was unnerving. I could see the weave of the fabric on his shirt, the way his dark hair was slightly unkempt at the collar. He never moved. Not a twitch, not a shift in his weight. He just stood there, a silent, static figure against the breathing, living forest. My archivist's brain kicked in, a desperate attempt to impose order, obsercument, analyze. Who was he? A poacher, a hermit. But no poacher would stand so openly in a clearing. No hermit would choose the base of the only occupied structure for 100 miles as his place for quiet contemplation. For 3 hours, I watched him. The sun began its slow descent, casting long, distorted shadows across the clearing. The man's own shadow stretched out before him, a long, dark finger pointing into the woods. He remained utterly motionless. I performed my scans every 15 minutes, my eyes snapping back to his position each time, a part of me hoping, praying, he would be gone. But he was always there, a permanent, inexplicable feature of the landscape. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange, a profound and primal fear began to take root in my soul. It was the fear of the unknown that Lovecraft wrote of, the oldest and strongest fear of mankind. This man was not a hiker. He was not a hermit. He was something else. He was a part of this place, a part of the rules. His presence was a statement. The world you know does not apply here. The logic you trust is useless. I did not call out. I did not radio for help. I followed the rule. Just as the last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon, he was gone. I didn't see him walk away. I had glanced down at my logbook for a mere second to note the time of sunset, and when I looked back up, the space he had occupied was empty. The clearing was deserted. That night, I did not read. I sat in the cupola in the dark, the lantern unlit, and I watched the empty clearing below. The silence was no longer a comfort. It was a living entity, filled with the things I could not see. The tapping on the glass, the fire that wasn't a fire, the man who wasn't lost. They were all data points, entries in a terrible new archive. And I was beginning to understand that I was not the archivist here. I was merely another record, another document, being filed away in the deep, silent drawers of the forest. The rules were not for my safety. They were for non-compliance. The archivist in me was dying. In his place was a creature of pure vigilance, a bundle of frayed nerves stretched taut over a skeleton of remembered procedure. My life, once governed by the gentle cadence of turning pages and the quiet satisfaction of a well-ordered collection, was now dictated by a new, terrible rhythm: the sweep of the binoculars, the crackle of the radio, and the ceaseless, silent scanning of the tree line for a man who should not be there. The forest was no longer a passive landscape. It had become an active participant in my torment. A vast, green canvas upon my deepest fears were being methodically painted. The silence had a texture now, a weight. It was the silence of a predator holding its breath. My journal, my trusted repository of fact, began to reflect this internal decay. The entries, once neat and objective, grew spidery and annotated with frantic whispered questions. Log entry day 14. Wind W 5 km. Visibility 150 km. No smokes. The silence today is different. Louder. Is that possible? I keep thinking of Eleanor. I wonder what she would have made of this place. Would she have seen the beauty, or would she have felt the teeth hiding behind the leaves? The radio, my sole tether to human reality, became my greatest source of dread. A few days after the man at the base of the tower had vanished, the voice of Roy from station 525 crackled through the speaker, thin and panicked. He was mid-transmission, ignoring all protocol. "It's the lights again, Kurt. Same as last time, but they're closer. They move through the trees. No sound. God, they're not like anything I've ever seen. They just stop and watch." "Station 525, I've told you." Kurt's voice cut in, cold as glacial ice. "Radio silence unless you have a confirmed smoke." "But you don't understand." Roy's voice was a half-sob. "There's a man out here, too." "He's just standing by the transmission cut out. Not with the clean click of the dispatcher ending the call, but with a burst of sharp static, like a snapped wire. I waited, my own breath caught in my throat. The silence that followed was absolute. Roy did not come back on the air. He missed his 1100 a.m. check-in. He missed his 11:15. Station 525 report. Kurt's voice said, a crack in his placid facade. Silence. "Roy, check in." He said again, the professionalism gone, replaced by something raw. Nothing. A lookout named Rose. Her voice laced with the usual gravelly annoyance. broke the silence. He's probably sleeping it off. What an idiot. Someone's got to go check on him, Kurt said, his voice strained. Rose, you're closest. Hell no. She shot back. I'm not hiking through 5 miles of muskeg for that drunk. Rose, I'm not asking. Kurt's voice was flat, final. Go, report back when you get there. For the next 2 hours I was a prisoner, chained to the radio. I sat frozen in my chair, the vast panorama of the forest ignored. My world had shrunk to the black speaker grill. I heard Rose's grudging reports. Her setting out, her complaining about the terrain, her arrival at the trail leading to Roy's tower. All right, I'm heading up the path now, she said, her breathing heavy. Place looks quiet. His truck is here, doors open. What a slob. A few minutes of silence. Kurt, you there? Her voice was different. The annoyance was gone, replaced by a tremor of unease. I'm here, Rose. What is it? The cabin door is open. It's a mess in here. Looks like it's been tossed. There was a pause, the sound of movement. His radio is smashed. And Kurt, there's blood on the bed. My own blood ran cold. I gripped the edge of my desk, my knuckles white. Get out of there, Rose, Kurt ordered, his voice urgent. I'm going, she said, her voice a high-pitched whisper. I'm going. Something's not right here. It feels wrong. Then, a sharp intake of breath. Oh God, wait, there's someone outside. At the bottom of the tower. Rose, who is it? Kurt demanded. I don't know. It's a man. His back is to me. He's just standing there. My heart stopped. It was Rule Phase 6. It was the man. He wasn't just at my tower. He was at Roy's. Rose, get out of the tower and back to your truck. Kurt's voice was pleading. Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. He's not moving, she whispered. He's just standing there, staring into the woods. A beat of silence, then a sound that will haunt me until the day I die, a choked, terrified gasp. He's turning around. The radio erupted into a scream. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror, ripped from the depths of her soul. It was not a sound a human being should be able to make. It was followed by a wet, crunching noise, and then, just as suddenly as it began, silence. Rose. Kurt's voice was a ghost. Rose, report. Ross! But there was only static. The empty, hissing void where a human life had just been. I don't know how long I sat there. Shaking, the dispatchers frantic, unanswered calls echoing in the small cupola. The sun began to set, and the forest that had once seemed beautiful was now a place of profound and absolute menace. The rules were not a guide to survival. They were a catalog of the phenomena that would claim you if you broke them. Roy talked. Rose looked. And now they were gone. That night, sleep was an impossibility. I was in the cabin, the door bolted, a heavy cast, iron skillet in my lap when a new sound began. A slow, rhythmic scraping from outside. It was the sound of something heavy being dragged through the dirt and grass circling the cabin. Over and over. A dry, rasping sound that set my teeth on edge. I endured it for an hour, my mind screaming, before it finally stopped directly beneath my only window. I held my breath, listening. And then I saw it. A dark shape rising into view. A hand, caked in dirt and what looked like dried leaves. Pressed a small object against the window pane. It held it there for a long moment, then retracted, disappearing into the darkness. The scraping sound began again, moving away from the cabin, back toward the tree line, until it faded into nothing. For a long time, I didn't move. I was paralyzed by a fear so complete it felt like a physical death. When I finally found the strength to crawl to the window, my heart hammering, I saw the object resting on the sill outside. It was a small, smooth, gray stone, with a single, distinctive white line running through it. It was the stone Eleanor had kept on her bedside table for 20 years. The one I had placed in her casket before they closed the lid forever. The archivist was dead. The rational man was dead. All that was left was a terrified widower, 100 miles from a world that made sense, who now understood that the thing in the forest didn't just want to kill him. It knew him. It knew his grief. And it was using it to peel him apart, layer by layer. I stumbled back from the window, my breath coming in ragged sobs, the skillet falling to the floor with a deafening clang. And as I huddled in the corner, a new sound began, closer this time. It was not the wind. It was not on the glass of the cupola high above. It was a slow, deliberate tapping. Tap, tap, coming from the trapdoor in the ceiling. The only other way in. Time ceased to be a measurable quantity. There was only the before and the after. Before the tapping on the trapdoor began, and the eternal heart, stopping now. I was no longer in the corner. I was plastered against the far wall of the cabin. The heavy iron skillet held before me like a useless shield. The sound was not loud, but it was methodical, patient. It was the sound of something that had all the time in the world. Tap, pa, tap. Each impact vibrated through the floorboards, a cold pulse that traveled up my spine. This was the final escalation. The entity was no longer content to be a peripheral horror, a sound on the glass, a figure in the clearing, a ghost on the radio. It had breached the perimeter. It was at the door. Then came the whisper. It was not a sound that traveled through the air to my ears. It was a thought that bloomed, fully formed, in the center of my mind. Arthur. My blood turned to ice. It was Eleanor's voice. Not her voice as I remembered it, full of warmth and life, but a thin, desiccated echo, like a recording played on a dying machine. It's so cold down here, Arthur. Why did you leave me in the cold? A sob, dry and ragged, tore from my throat. This was a violation beyond comprehension. It was grave, robbing my soul, taking the most sacred memories and twisting them into instruments of torture. You are not her, I whispered, the words barely audible. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was worse, thick with anticipation. Then, a new sound. A soft, wet scraping against the wood of the trapdoor. I have something for you, my love. A gift. The scraping intensified, and with dawning, absolute horror, I realized what it was. It was the sound of fingernails digging into wood, trying to find a purchase, trying to pull the door open from below. My mind fractured. The archivist, the man of reason and order, was a distant memory. I was a cornered animal waiting for the teeth. My hand, shaking uncontrollably, fumbled in my pocket, and closed around the laminated sheet of rules. It was a talisman, the only piece of scripture in this godless place. I pulled it out, my eyes scanning the familiar, terrifying lines, searching for an answer, a weapon, anything. My thumb brushed against the back of the laminated sheet. It wasn't smooth. There was something there. With trembling fingers, I turned it over. On the back, almost invisible in the dim light, was a final rule. It wasn't typewritten like the others. It was scratched into the paper with a desperate, jagged hand, the pen having torn through the page in places. Rule Phase 70, it is not the forest you must feed. It is the tower. It feeds on memory. Give it your most precious, or it will take all the rest. A wave of terrible, clarifying light washed through me. It was a moment of breakthrough born from ultimate desperation. I finally understood. The tower itself was the entity. Parasitic consciousness that had stood here for decades, feeding on the minds of the lonely, isolated souls sent to occupy it. It tested them with the rules, weeding out those who would fight or flee. Roy talked. Rose looked. They broke the rules, and the tower took them, all of them, their fears and their lives swallowed whole. The man with his back turned, the spook fires, the tapping, they were all lures. Probes sent out by the central intelligence of this place to gauge its prey. It had found my weakness, my grief. It had dangled Eleanor before me, using her memory to break me down, to prepare me for the final consumption. And now it was at the door, ready to take everything. Give it your most precious. My most precious memory. What was it? My life with Eleanor was a vast archive of precious moments. Our wedding day. The birth of our son, lost to fever in his second year. No. It had to be something singular. Something pure. Something that was the cornerstone of my entire identity. The scraping at the trapdoor grew louder, more frantic. A thin splinter of wood fell to the floor. I knew what I had to do. It was a choice so monstrous it barely seemed possible. But the alternative, to become another silent scream absorbed into this place, like Roy and Rose, was unthinkable. I scrambled to my desk, my movements clumsy with terror. I fumbled with my wallet, my fingers refusing to obey. I pulled out the photograph I had carried for 30 years. It was worn at the edges, the colors faded. But it was my anchor in the world. It was a picture of Eleanor, taken on our first picnic. She is laughing, her head thrown back, the sun catching the gold in her hair. She is looking not at the camera, but at me. In her eyes is the entire world. A world of shared jokes and quiet, understanding, a world that had ended, but which I had carried inside me. A perfect, preserved artifact. This was my most precious memory. The moment I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was loved. Let me in, Arthur. It's time to be together. Eleanor's voice, pleading, desperate, from the other side of the door. No, I said, my own voice shaking but firm. I would not let it have her. Not the real her. I struck a match. The flare of the sulfur was a violent orange star in the darkness. The scraping stopped. The voice went silent. The tower was waiting. It was watching. I held the corner of the photograph to the flame. The moment the fire touched the paper, I felt it. A psychic wrenching, a violent, tearing sensation deep within my mind. It was an agony beyond any physical pain. It was the feeling of my own soul, being unwritten. The image of Eleanor's laughing face began to curl and blacken, and as it did, the memory itself was pulled from me. I could feel the threads of it. The scent of the grass, the taste of the cheap wine, the sound of her laughter, being drawn out of my head like ribbons of silk, sucked into the hungry silence of the cabin. I cried out, a raw, animal sound of loss. I fought to hold on, to keep her face in my mind, but it was like trying to hold water in my hands. Her features blurred, the color of her eyes faded. The sound of her voice became a meaningless echo. The photograph was ash, and with it, the memory was gone. Utterly and completely. The name Eleanor remained, but it was just a word now. A collection of letters with no face, no feeling, no love attached. A catalog entry for a book that had been burned. The skillet fell from my numb hand and clattered to the floor. The silence that returned was different. It was not the charged, predatory silence from before. It was empty, sterile. The silence of a vacuum. The tower was sated. I had made the required sacrifice. I survived the night. I don't know if I slept. When the first gray light of dawn filtered through the window, I climbed the ladder to the cupola. The world outside was the same. The endless sea of trees, the vast, indifferent sky. But I was a stranger in it. The man who had arrived here, the grieving archivist named Arthur Wallace, was gone. I was a hollowed-out thing, a record with its most important entry erased. The sound of the helicopter was a distant annoyance. When it landed, the pilot found me sitting in the chair, staring at nothing. He spoke to me, but I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. I am told I have been here for some time now, in this clean, quiet room. They are kind. They ask me questions I don't understand. They want to know what happened at Watchtower 7. I cannot tell them. But I can write. It is the only thing left of the man I was. And so I have set down this record. A final entry for a collection that is now closed. There is one last thing. Before they led me from the tower, I took my pen and I added a final entry to document that had governed my life and my sanity. A warning for whoever comes next. I don't know if they will find it. I don't know if they will understand. But I have to believe that a record, however incomplete, is better than silence. On the back of the yellowed, laminated page, beneath the desperate scrawl of Rule 87, there is now a new line, written in the neat, precise hand of a professional archivist. Rule I-80, do not bring your ghosts with you. The tower is always hungry.